my neighbor, Pete Schwind. Peter?
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and all the members of the Historical Society. Actually, this is my fourth time that I've been up at this mic to make the same presentation. And the bad news is, it's the same old target ship. It hasn't changed, it's still there. The good news is, this year I was fortunate to find some drone pictures that were taken in April. And they are really dramatic. Because one of the questions that people always ask is, what's the state of the ship now? Well, you're going to find that out when I get to those drone pictures. So, as Joe said, I grew up in Eastham. And so I'm just looking at my notes, that way I don't repeat myself too much. I went to the Eastham Grammar School. It was a large class. There were 5 of us. Myself and 4 girls. And all I can say is they taught me how to cheat. I couldn't spell. I still can't spell. But they helped me get through first grade by assisting me with the spelling tests. Second grade, same teacher. Then I moved on and had the same teacher for 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. 4 years. And I had her son, who was my realtor here for a long time. And then, of course, the last 2 years, it was an 8-year school. I had the principal, Mr. Nicholson. And then moved on to the All Names High School. And at that time, I mean, now I know it's a regional school here in Austin Regional School. The folks, the students from Eastham and Brewster paid tuition to All Names for their students to go there. So we had no say. The parents in Eastham had no say, or the school committee had no say as to what happened. There was no attempt to make any transfer. So the interesting thing is I had 4 years of Shakespeare in high school. My first grammar was when I went to college. So what do you mean, what's a noun? I don't know what a noun is. So anyhow, I survived. As I said, I grew up in Sampson Road. I left in 1955 to go to school, college at Northeastern University in Boston. Along the way, I ended up working for Polaroid. Was there for 30 years. And I'm going to be a little bit like Paul Harvey. I'm going to tell you the rest of the story later on, okay, about Polaroid. It's very, very interesting. I never knew anything about it when I worked for Polaroid, but they had a very, very close eye to the World War II effort, as it turned out. So anyhow, I did buy a fishing boat in 1988. I built a house in 78 next to my dad's place. And now I'm down here during the summer, and I do a lot of commercial fishing, I do a lot of pleasure fishing, so I keep busy. I will show the next slide. These are all the credits, and you can read who they are. This book here by Francis Higgins is very, very interesting. If anybody's interested in the history of Rock Harbor, it documents all of the fishermen and all the things that happened during the history of Rock Harbor. And the thing that's new this year is Josh Murray was kind enough to let me use his drone pictures. So, and you can read the rest of the things. Okay, this is the house that I grew up in. This picture was taken in 1947. Notice there are no telephone poles, because we grew up without electricity, without a telephone, and a battery-operated citizen aerobic radio. So, things change. This was taken last year. Telephone poles, and here's the corner of the barn. If you're familiar with Sampson Road, I'm sure you've seen that barn. It sits pretty close to the road. The barn is still there, but I have to regretfully say that I had to sell the property a while ago, and folks have built a new house on it. So, but you can see how the trees have grown in. My Eastham. He had spent summers down here with his grandfather, who had cottages on Great Pond. And the plan was, because he had gone to BU and studied journalism, he was going to write great short novels. He was going to get rich writing novels. Well, guess what? It's not easy to sell stuff, even though it could be good. So in order to survive, he raised turnips, and he knew how to go down to Christiana Beach, what was then known as the West Shore, and walk out, low tide, and scratch bullocks. So I know one winter, my folks lived on turnips and bullocks, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because the reality is, when his turnips were ready for the market, everybody else's turnips were ready for the market. And it was going to cost him more to ship the turnips than he was going to get for them in the marketplace. So he had a lot of turnips. So, of course, he could sell the co-ops, which he did. So the process was, you go to the West Shore, you walk out a mile, you scratch a bushel of co-ops, 90 pounds, you throw it on your back, you walk ashore a mile, drop it on your car, turn it around, walk back out another mile. So on a good tide, that time you could get maybe 2 or maybe even 3 bushels. And somebody said to him, "Gee, Phil, you know, if you had a boat, what you could do is you could buoy up your bags of cohogs and go out in the boat at high tide and just pull them up. So that way you could spend the whole tide scratching. You wouldn't have to carry them a mile back in and walk a mile back out." So that's what he did. He got a small boat. And along the way, someone said, "Oh, gee, Bill, you know, soft-shell clams are worth a lot more than cohogs." Believe it or not. And there were a lot of clams at that time on Billinsgate Island. So I think initially they actually rode a dory from Lee's River, officially Herring River, over at Billinsgate. But quite soon he had a boat with a small engine in it. And they noticed all these splashes as they were going along. So what in the hell are those splashes? Well, it turned out they were striped bass. In 1944, striped bass were selling for 50 cents a pound. So that whole process started a very long career of shell fishing and commercial fishing. Any kind of fishing you can imagine from the town of Eastham, my dad did. So anyhow, along the way, he ended up running a charter boat out of Rock Harbor for 25 years, the White Cap. And in order to promote the fishing, he started writing a weekly column in the Cape Cod. Basically, you know, so-and-so caught so many fish and such and such boat and so forth. It was to promote the charter boat fishing out of Rock Harbor. At the end of the season, because Johnny Ullman, who was the assistant editor up there, was his cousin, he said to Johnny, "You know, season's over, there's no more fishing, I'll stop writing." Well, Johnny knew he had a few stories. So he said, "Phil, why don't you write a column about all the characters that you know during the winter?" So I don't know how many of you remember his stories, but they became a legend because what he would do is he would start out the story with something that was obviously true. Last sentence of the story was obviously fiction. And so the challenge was, where did he transfer from fact to fiction? As there were people that bought the Cape Cod for years just because of his art. So anyhow, he also lectured a lot for the National Seashore, taught surf casting and a bunch of other stuff for them. But I was his right-hand man. And I started boating very early. That's a little sailboat. I'm standing there. Of course, it's fine dry in my backyard, but you know, I had a good time sailing. And also, I was hauling crab pots. It's amazing. I never caught a crab, but I sure tried. So along the way, he had Nani, a little 25-footer. That's me in the white shirt. We were gassing up at the time. So I went with him a lot. You know, this is the white cap. That's me as mate standing in the stern. Of course, that was my dad up on the Flying Bridge. So I made it for him, I think, full-time for 2 years. So, anyhow, I learned a lot. Spent a lot of time in the water, spent a lot of time going by the Longstreet. So, I just want to tell you this, that I'm a little bit like Elizabeth Warren. Everything I know about the target ship, my dad told me. I promise, everything I'm going to tell you tonight is true. Hey, enough of that. Now, if you served in the Navy, you can't answer this question. Does anybody know what the SS stands for the SS James Longstreet? You know the answer to it. You can't. It's my good one. SS stands for steamship. Growing up, I would have bet you $1,000 that there was a diesel-powered vessel out there. Turns out it was a steamship. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. Of course, there was a war going on in the early 40s, 1940, whatever. And this is a good example. There was never a time when you went and looked out in the ocean that you didn't see smoke from some freighter that had been torpedoed. So the German subs just sat out there and torpedoed anybody that went by. So this lifeboat was from a British boat. Came ashore. Coast Guard said no one can take pictures. And they were very busy conserving, taking film and cameras from people. My mother managed to snap this and hide the camera, so we ended up with that picture. But it was so, people I realized, you were not allowed on the outer beach. You were not allowed on the beach, period. And the Coast Guard patrolled, and the orders that they had was if they saw somebody at night on the beach, shoot. Because it was automatically assumed that they were a saboteur or a supporter of the German subs. So, no questions asked. I don't know if anybody ever got shot, but I can tell you this, there weren't many people on the beach. Okay, so of course, our next picture, myself and my sister, we were waving at a blimp. By the way, these are birdhouses. We get tree swallows all over the place. You can see, this is the field, this is the road over here. So you can see in the field there was what, a little pine tree, nothing else. Wow. That's how much it's grown up. The blimp was used to try to spot the German subs. That's what the blimps are doing down here. And just, you know, I'll mention, in the beginning of the war, the folks that operated the submarines were heroes because they were so successful. They sank 1,000 freighters in 1940 with 0 losses. At the end of the war, if they were on a submarine, it was a suicide mission. They went out and they never came back. So you can see that during the course of the war, the Allies developed detection techniques and depth charges and bombs that would do the subs in. So, anyhow, Britain was at war, we were not. But President Roosevelt agreed to help them. We had a lot of materials that were needed by the Allies. And the trouble is there were a lot of ships that were sunk, and no one had actually freighters that were available. They didn't exist. So the Maritime Commission was tasked with building cargo ships to fill this need. In reality, Britain hired the U.S. to build 50 Liberty ships. So the first 50 Liberty ships were paid for by Britain, belonged to them. They decided what cargo should go in them and where it should go. They chose a design because they wanted something that was pretty simple, but pretty large for the day. So there was an English ship called the Empire Liberty. So the original name of the ship design was Liberty after that ship. since these ships, the Liberty ships, were instrumental in winning the war, they were given credit for our liberty. It's been said that they were so successful. I mean, I'll just tell you, there were 2,710 actually built. They had planned 2,750, but 2,710 were built. There were only 200 totally lost to enemy action in storms. And I think there were more lost to storms than there were to enemy action. And by the way, they had to travel outside of the normal shipping lanes, because the Japanese and the German subs would just sit at the shipping lanes and torpedo anybody that went by. So, needless to say, they had to take a long route around. Roosevelt looked at them and commented that the ships were ugly ducklings. He was a big boat fan and belonged to yacht clubs and so forth. So they were kind of ugly, but very effective. Okay, at this time, I know of 4 Liberty ships that still exist. There is one in Baltimore, the John W. Brown. It's very interesting. It's actually a school ship. It does make cruises, but in let me get the data right, 1991, I believe, it took 75,000 volunteer man-hours to bring it back operational. The other ship is out in San Francisco. It's nearly the original configuration. There was a ship given to Greece, because at the end, these ships were designed for a 5-year life. They weren't supposed to last. But one was given to Greece, and there's one up in Alaska providing power for a cannery up there somewhere. There were 18 shipyards in this country that built Liberty ships. At the end of the war, the average time from laying to launch was 20 days. They were averaging 3 launches a day. And I'm going to tell you why they were able to do that. There was over 1.5 million workers. One of these burned at the dock. The very first action that was taking place with an American ship was a Liberty ship and a German ship. And they were greatly outmanned, but they fought one another and they both sank. So the Liberty ship actually was the first U.S. ship to destroy a German ship. In the process, their ship got destroyed. They were heavily outmanned, or outgunned, I guess. Okay, the SS James Longstreet was built by the Todd Houston Shipbuilding Corporation in Houston, Texas. And wait a minute. I have to turn the page. Okay, what we're seeing here is a typical Liberty ship. Notice the guns here. These are anti-aircraft positions. They usually had 6. There were guns in the bow and in the stern. And, I just want to tell you this. Everyone thinks that they could look out in the bay and see this little thing out there, right? The Liberty ships were 440 feet long. That's 1.5 football fields. They were 65 feet wide. They drew 27 feet of water when they were fully loaded. So by today's standards, I mean, compared to the container ships and everything, they're very small. But at that time, they were very large. And just to give you an idea of what they could carry, they weighed around 7,000 tons, so they could carry a load of 10,000 tons. A Liberty ship could carry 2,840 Jeeps. If those Jeeps were boxed and loaded 9 to a 40-foot flat car, the train would be 2 1/3 miles long. In some cases, there were 2 trains that came with cargo for one ship. They could carry 525 armored MA cars or 3/4-ton ambulances. If they were boxed and loaded 2 to a flat car, that train would be just over 2 miles long. They could carry 440 light tanks or 260 medium tanks. If the light tanks were parked next to each other, they would cover more than an acre. The medium tanks would cover more than an acre. So they were larger than people realize. Okay, now we move on. Oops, go back. Anybody know what that is? Anybody remember that? Well, you're not as old as I am. That's a coupe made by Henry J. Kaiser Corporation. And it's important because, next slide, Mr. Kaiser brought the technology that was used, I'll let you read the slide here, two new concepts: welding steel plates, making sub-assemblies offline, and bringing them together and welding them. So, I guess the average construction time was 42 days. This is at 3 ships during one. Up to this time, pieces were brought in, were shaped, or cut, were riveted, then the next piece was brought in, cut, shaped, riveted, the next piece was brought in. So the minimum time to build a ship was 6 months. And I think there were some ships that took 2 to 3 years to actually construct. So the concept of welding and bringing, they did very large sub-assemblies off-site so that a lot of stuff could be going on while the keel was being laid and so forth, everything else could be made. And like the main part of the ship, just go back to the ship for a minute. This assembly in the center was actually 4 stories tall. And they would make that, this is where all of the offices, the control center was, the offices lived, the mess happened, all of the crew stuff happened in this area here. They would build them off-site, but they were so heavy the cranes couldn't lift them. So they would be cut in half, positioned on the ship, and then welded together. So if you notice when the Longstreet came into the bay, that had been removed. The Maritime Commission had removed everything they could have valued. And why they did that, I don't know, but they did. So, anyway, Kaiser, we can move on. In San Francisco Bay, I'm looking for the name of the town, he had a site that I know was 880 acres. He had 4 main bays to build ships. He was responsible for building, his yards were responsible for building 1,500 ships during the war. And of that, there was, I'm trying to read the number, it was around 800 of those were Liberty ships. As a publicity stunt, he started a deal. He built one in 4 days, 15 hours, and 27 minutes. From the time the keel was laid to the time it was launched. Now, after it was launched, it had to be fitted out, so there was more time that it had to go in before it was ready to sink. But there's a story, I just read it today, it's kind of a funny story. A lady was visiting, he was giving her a tour, and she said, well, how long does it take to build a Liberty ship? And he said, well, would you like to christen one? And she said, yes. So he reached in the cabinet, got a bottle of wine, gave it to her. He walked out to one of the places where they built the ships. It was empty. It was trash. Nothing was there. And she said, I don't see a Liberty ship. And he said, start swinging. By the time you swing it, there'll be one there. So I guess that was a slight exaggeration. But it's amazing what this country was able to do when the need was there. Okay, the Liberty ships had 250,000 sub-assemblies. Some of them weighed up to 250 tons. Oh yeah, it was Richmond, California, here it is here. And by the way, it had a workforce of 93,000 workers, and officially there were 27% women. I think the number was much higher than that. And by the way, the women, there was a course. You came in, you didn't need to know anything. You came in, you were taught how to weld. The women were much better at welding than the men were, because they were patient. The men just wanted to go. The women went at the correct speed so that the weld penetrated down through the metal, the thickness of the metal. So, and by the way, there was failures of these Liberty ships that cracked in the middle. There was a case where actually one cracked. They took the winches from the loading cranes and everything, strung the cable, and managed to pull the ship back together to get into port. There was some that cracked actually and broke apart. And in fact, the Longstreet, that's the reason it was discontinued, was it actually cracked and developed a big crack. We'll talk about that more. The thought was there was the welding. The welding was the problem. Actually, it was a woman who was a metallurgist that found out that it was because some steels get very brittle in the cold. So it was the cold waters of the North Atlantic that actually caused the failures of the ships. Okay. Okay, here it is. They produced 747 ships, including 519 Liberty ships. Okay, this Liberty ship, just want you to notice there's two decks. There's a deck here, and there's a deck up here. The holes are down here. There's 5 holes. This is the steam engine in the middle of it. One steam engine. It was a triple expansion. The cylinders, I'll give you the numbers, the cylinders were big. It developed 2,500 horsepower. There were 2 boilers that provided steam to drive it. This engine weighed 140 tons. A little bit big for my boat. Okay. Why don't we move on? Okay, this is the first known photograph of the Longstreet. It was taken in England. And you can see they didn't worry too much about how they looked. They functioned and sailed where they went. It was named after Major General Longstreet, who was a Confederate general under General Lee. And I guess he was Lee's right-hand man. He was blamed for the defeat at Gettysburg. And his second wife spent her lifetime proving that that wasn't true, and she finally did. It turned out that General Longstreet had followed orders and done exactly what he was told to do. And in fact, he did some brilliant stuff in some of the other battles. He was involved in all the major battles that Lee was involved in. Just as an aside, they built 2,700 of these ships. They needed 2,700 names. If you had an extra $2 million hanging around, you could get to name your own ship. All you had to do was to give them the $2 million to build it. So they went through the presidents, they went through this, they went through that. They kept digging deeper and deeper. Okay, she had actually 3 voyages. Just mentioned on one of the voyages, yeah, we can move along soon. All right, I'm letting you read all that. Yeah, first voyage, places I've never heard of, no idea where they are. Second and third voyages were round trips to Liverpool. One of these second or third trips, they were staging in Halifax because they would form convoys to go across the Atlantic. She collided with a British ship, the West Point. There was severe damage to the West Point, some damage to the Longstreet. The Brits wanted something like $340,000. They took them to court. That happened in 1944, or 1943, I guess. In 54, it was settled in court for $6,000. But I just want to point out one fact. The Longstreet was damaged on the starboard bow. Just remember that. Okay. It turned out in October of 1943, she was waiting entry into New York, the port of New York. She was off the coast of Sandy Hook in New York, in New Jersey. A northeast gale came up, she was blown ashore. And I use the term amidships, means the middle of the boat, was supported by a sandbar. The bow and the stern was not supported. So there was an 8-inch crack. You can't see it, but there was an 8-inch crack that developed. The next slide. I thought it was the next slide. Next slide. These are the people walking off the town of Jacob's Ladder and walking ashore. So the ship was declared a total loss. And I think normally, that would have been the end of it. However, the Navy wanted it. So they actually dug channels and refloated it and repaired it. There was a crew of 42 merchant marine men on the ship. There were 29 armed Navy personnel. And just as an interesting fact, the merchant marine people were all recruited. They had one thing in mind. How much money are we going to make on this trip? The Navy guys knew that they were at risk. So their concern was, are we going to get there in one piece? They didn't understand how long the voyage was going to be. So the Navy guys didn't take enough clothes. So they ran out of underwear, they ran out of pants. The stuff disintegrated. The merchant men wouldn't help them. It was so bad, the second lieutenant in charge of the Navy contingent refused to go on another voyage. Throw me in jail, I'm not going again, because there's going to be a mutiny and somebody's going to get killed. There was not happening. And bear in mind, a lot of these guys were really not experienced seamen, especially the captains. They were, never had been captain of a ship before.
Where did they repair it?
I'm sorry?
Where did they repair the ship?
I'm sorry.
Where did they repair the ship when they repaired it?
Well, they towed it into New York Harbor, and they bolted it on site to get it so they could float it. Yeah. Okay, I'll continue. We're running out of time anyhow. Before it came to Cape Cod, it was used for two different programs. One was called the Pelican, the other one was called the Bat, and they were both air-to-surface radar-guided missiles. And the ship was so badly damaged it had to be brought in and repaired a number of times. It broke free in December. I think there's a picture of that. Next slide. Oh yeah, here she is adrift. Mid-Atlantic, nobody knew what happened to her. After 2 months they found her and brought her back. Those programs were canceled when I guess the visibility was poor. The pilots looking at his radar screen and he saw a ship, he fired the missile. It was a cargo vessel, it wasn't the target ship. Luckily, the thing hit the water, bounced over the ship, it took the rail and left some parts, and really didn't damage the ship. But it could have easily sunk the ship with total loss of life. So the Navy abandoned that program. Okay, so the question is, why did the Navy want a target ship? Well, as I said, I worked for Polaroid for 30 years. And it turned out that Dr. Land and his team of scientists did a whole bunch of things. He was a friend of Michael Patton, so there was a problem with Patton's tanks, that when they fired the gun, there was a recoil of about 8 inches. So you had to aim, move your head away, fire the gun. They got slaughtered in the battle. So he went to Land and said, I want a gun sight that we can look at, 12 inches back. So when the gun recoils 9 inches, it doesn't hit the guy and kill him. So Land developed, in fact, a gun sight that was used in all of those tanks to solve that problem. He developed a thing called a vectograph. 3D, they would take a picture, take another picture, combine the images, and it would give them a 3D image, because the Germans and the Japanese were very good at camouflaging everything, and you couldn't tell from a regular photograph, but these 3D photographs showed really what was there. I mean, they made tanks out of plywood. They made guns out of telephone poles, things like that to fool the Allies. So that vectograph was used at every major Allied invasion. So along the way, they did a lot of other stuff too. Along the way, the Navy said, we would like to improve our bombing, because at that time, planes had to dive bomb on the ship, or drop the bombs from high altitude. Diving on a ship that was well armed and protected was not good for pilots. Dropping bombs from high altitude proved that most of the ships could see them and avoid them, so that they were not that effective. So the Navy wanted an infrared sensing bomb to sense the heat of the ship and guide toward the ship. And that was the program called the Dove program. I'm just reading. Move on here. Yeah, so Polaroid had used ground targets at both Wellfleet and Wanamaoi, but those were stationary targets. So they needed a real ship that had the heat of a real ship. And so the Maritime Commission agreed to give this, actually they gave this ship, the Longstreet, to the Navy at that time. So she had sunk. They raised her, took her to Boston, removed all the stuff they could, including the pilot house and everything else. They knew the ship was going to sink, so they put 10,000 55-gallon drums in the ship to keep it afloat. And there's some interesting stories. Okay, so that's why they needed a ship. Why did they choose Cape Cod Bay? Well, it turns out that they needed something that was protected. They needed something that the planes should get to easily. And if you look at Cape Cod, it forms a nice, protection for the ship. So if they put it out in the ocean, they thought that anything they put out in the ocean would be destroyed by the big waves. So that because it was in the bay, it would last longer than if they put it someplace else. Okay. So in late April of 1945, she was towed into Cape Cod Bay. And according to Noel, there were 4 tugs that brought her to the bay. Unfortunately, they didn't know where the shoal was. So they asked local fishermen, I believe it was Roy Richardson, he led them to the shoal. They spent, that's another story. There were some women from, there are all kinds of stories. So there were some women from Orleans that had inside track. So they heard that the Navy was bringing this big ship into the bay. So they take themselves and drive the car down to Bristol County Beach. They look out, sure enough, the Navy's bringing in a big ship. Well, the story they heard was that the Navy was going to blow it up. So they're sitting in their car and they say, if there's a big explosion, it could break our windows. So they roll down the windows of their car. They sat there for 4 hours. They got really cold. They went home. People, believe it or not, are still waiting for it to blow up. So according to my dad, they spent 3 days aligning the ship exactly north and south. They went home. 4 tugboats. During the night, a wind came up. She swung around and she sank. So they came back in the morning and found that it had already sunk. So the official report said that they scuttled it at 9:46 in the morning. That was the official Navy report. Noel, by the way, looked that up and got the original report. So can you believe everything that's reported by the Navy or any other service? Try your own conclusion. Okay. At the end of the war, Land lost interest in this program. He was into instant photography, And people don't realize that there was a very close relationship between Polaroid and Kodak. Kodak made all the Polaroids negative for years and years and years and years. So he talked Kodak into taking over the program. And there were two missiles that we have today that came from that research. The Sidewinder and the Sparrow were two missiles based upon the research that man did. Okay, she sank in around 16 feet of water. So after that, after the Dove program moved on, the war was over, the Navy, and I believe it was the Army, apparently it was not the Air Force, and I'm not sure who else, used it to train the pilots. So that's what we all remember. The pilots would come down, squadron of planes. They were taught how to navigate. They were taught how to fly in tight formation. They were taught how to bomb. And I remember that when they first showed up, horizontal flight, let the bombs go, they missed by a mile. After 3 weeks of practice, they were dive bombing out of the sky and would hit the target every single time. It was amazing how quickly the pilots learned. Okay, the bomb. There we go. That was the standard bomb. It was a 12-inch cast iron bomb. It had a smoke charge in it that produced smoke and a flash of light so that you could see when it hit the target. The fishermen used those to weight their flagpoles. My dad had a lot of them. And when I inherited the property, I went through the barn with a fine-tooth comb. I didn't find any. So he gave them all to someone I don't know. Okay, the nighttime bombing. Flares. I see I'm running low on time, so I'm going to keep moving. This is taken from Rock Harbor, or the Eastham side of Rock Harbor. Notice how high the ship is sitting. It's amazing. It's low tide. The ship's sitting on the bottom. There's a 10-foot rise and fall of tide here in Cape Cod Bay. So everyone says, oh, she's floating high today. No, the tide was out. I have a bunch of stories. And what we're going to tell you the story is we're going to look at ships. Mostly, these are my slides now that I had. We had an iceman. His name was Tom Brown. We had an ice chest. He knew exactly what size chunk of ice to make. He would come in the house. Of course, the door was never locked. He never knocked. He came in, went in the kitchen, put the ice in the ice box, and was gone. I don't know if he saw anything when he came in, but he would never announce himself. He just came in and dropped things. Well, he had a son. And this story is from his son, Francis. I quote, as a boy, I had many visits and meals of water. As a Cape Cod native from Eastham, I was very friendly with a man named John Curtis Curtin, who owned a double-ender. He took me many times to the Longstreet in 1945 and 46. When they were using it for the Dove program, the Navy first and then the Coast Guard had 2 people aboard the vessel to make sure that nothing disappeared. They wanted all of the oil, they wanted all the equipment. So before there were test bombs dropped, they would come and take the people off the boat and then put them back on it as soon as they were through using it, as soon as they were through bombing. So they were out there. They could be out there for weeks, 2 guns. Of course, they didn't have any refrigeration, but they did have good stuff. So we go aboard to meet the crew for a meal of steak and eggs. What a thrill of a boy of 15 years to have steak when meat was rationed near the end of the war. The crew was always glad to receive Kurt in his double-ender, as he would smuggle booze to them in return for the steaks. So my dad had a partner. My first memory of fishing is in that double-ender, by the way. Very rough. I don't think we caught anything. Okay, there are all kinds of rumors about moon customers and people taking stuff off. The junkyard story. There was a fellow someplace on the Cape that had a junkyard. He also had a 40-footer. He would take that 40-footer out at night, settling torch. You could see the torch from first thing on the beach. He worked on that boat all one summer. He sold the scrap, of course. So he took everything he could. And there were stories that people came as far away as from New Bedford to get, diesel fuel and other supplies off the ship. I know the local dragging fleet did take some diesel oil. Okay. Taken in the 1960s, okay. Bombs landing on the land. During my youth, the 12-inch bomb was standard. And my theory is that it was a small bomb. Pilots would hit a release. It was supposed to fall out of the chute. Well, the thing would stick, wouldn't fall. But it was already released. So the planes would circle, always tipped up when they were making their circle, and vibration. So the bombs would eventually shake loose. So I know that we had one land in our field across from our house, and I know other people found them. As far as the pilots are instructed, don't fly over houses, don't fly over boats. So as far as I know, no one was ever injured from any of these bombs. Lots of stories. Was anybody, in the 1970s now, story, was anybody injured? The answer is yes. There were 5 youths that boarded the ship in 1970. They carried home 5 bombs. One of them was using a screwdriver to clean out the bomb. It exploded, severing one of his fingers. They removed from the ship 200-pound exploded bombs, 2 bomb barrettes, each containing 5 pounds of explosive, and a Mach 4 sporting practice bomb. It was this practice bomb that exploded. Okay, I heard today, and I know that a plane went down in the bay. They lost a few planes along the way. So I didn't know why the plane went down, but apparently it structural failure, like one of the wings fell off. So the plane was dropped in the bay. The Navy came in with dredges, with derricks and floats and barges and everything. My dad went over and said, "Would you like to know where the plane is?" They said, "Oh, it's a military matter. Mind your own business. You're a civilian." They searched for 3 days. He went over again. Said, "Would you like to know where the plane is?" They said, "Please show us where the plane is." And of course, he had seen the oil slick when the plane went down, so he knew exactly where it was. The ship had a lot of graffiti on it from time to time. The most famous one, there were five youths, 4 males and a female. In late 1966, they purchased a copy of Playboy magazine, a gallon of white paint. They went out on Rock Harbor on the girls' boat. They painted a large picture of the Playboy bunny on the side of the ship. That was visible for 1 year. I guess the second year it was still there, but it was hard to see. Okay, quickly, another story. This is from Robert Finch. He's an author, I believe, in Baltimore, quite well known. I don't happen to know of his writings. And of course, this was written some time ago. He said, that forest of plants that was growing up there on the decks? He said, well, some of them were funny plants. Well, he continued, this is about 40 years ago, so it was a long time ago. A friend of mine called me up one evening and asked me to take him up to the target ship in my boat. This was in October. I asked him why. He said, never mind. I just need to get out there. So I took him out. The sun cold out there, stiff breeze, out of the northwest. He climbs up on the side of the hull using the bomb holes, disappears. Well, he goes up and I'm sitting there freezing. After a while, he comes back down and hands me some plants. They had pointed them, funny plants. And they said, oh no, you don't. I'm not getting caught with these on my boat. Come on, man, there's supposed to be a frost tonight. Can you believe growing weed on a U.S. government property in an officially restricted zone? So you can see there was a lot of debris in the book. Okay, here's a picture of me sitting in the stern of my dad's workboat. He had been out fishing. And I don't know if it was on this trip, but it was on a similar trip where we're out there, it's getting dark, it's quite rough. He says, turn on the lights. I said, how do I turn on the lights? Used to take the bare wires and pull them against the battery terminal. 12 volts. Every time the wave came and hit me, I got shocked. I'd let go of the wires. He yelled at me, turn on the lights! I wired the boat. We actually had switches after that. Okay, so now we just got a bunch of slides. This is my fishing pole. I'm still using that pole, by the way. It's amazing. All right, we got to move along soon. Yeah. So these are through the years. You can see deterioration. That sailboat was in a lot of my slides. I believe the guy was commercial lobster diving. Okay, keep going. People say, what happened to the ship? Well, in 1996, there was a bad storm, and what was basically visible from the shore disappeared. I read reports. The ship sank. No, it was already sitting on the water. The ship rolled over. It was already buried in feet of sand. My theory, and I think a good one, maybe move along. Keep going. Ice. These are taken in the wintertime. Take the next slide. So you can see those ice cakes there that built up. So my theory is during the storm there was ice that moved out, pushed by the wind and the tide, and that basically sheeted off at the water line. And by that time the top side was so badly damaged that it just basically collapsed. And I think fell down next to the ship. Okay, next slide. I want to thank Josh Murray for these drone pictures. They're great. Okay, this one drone picture. Just point out a few things. This pile here out of the water is the anchor chain. So these things here out of the water are masts. So you can see that the deck of that ship, well, it's got holes in it. It may have been hatches where it went down, I don't know. But she's pretty much intact.
This was just taken, right, in April?
Taken this April. So keep going. Yeah, the anchor chain, the forward mast, out of the water, keep going. Some structure that's out, keep going, that's the midships. Here's the stern, the same structure we just saw, the stern mast. So you can see there's a lot of it left. And God help the person that runs his boat on it. Yeah, just keep going. So these are all sticking up. These are the ribs of the boat. They're all sharp, they're all strong, and they go through a fiberglass boat in no time at all. Out of the water.
Is that low tide?
Yes, it had to be a very low tide. Yeah. Keep going. Oh, I wanted to point out, first thing on the beach is right over here. You see the houses and then the beach. Yeah. The next picture. Keep going. I just wanted to point out, here's the ship, here's the bow of the ship, here's the stern of the ship, 440 feet. Here's the buoy that marks the location of the ship. 300 feet away from the ship, maybe? And of course they do that because if it was a real ship, the ship would block the light, so they move the position of the buoy away from the ship so that it can be seen over a greater angle. However, if you think the ship is next to the buoy, you're in trouble. So this slide was taken by Noel. He bought a special camera. He worked for days in the lake wall when it was cold. He finally got this picture. So this is good night. Thanks for coming. Are there any questions? One question.
So did they intend to put it on a shoal at Eastham, or did we just, how did it end up Eastham and not Barnstable or Plymouth?
Well, There's a shoal there, there's about 20 feet of water at low tide, the new found shoal. And that's the only one around.